Hi, Dr. Nadolny. I'm going to do a video portfolio reflection. However, if you would prefer to read this, then I do have the written versions that you can find below on my website. So this is my first post that I chose, and I wanted to do the question that had us critiquing our, or the, oops, there we go, the chart that was shown here. And so it asked us if the chart was accurate, what could be done to improve it. And so I talked a little bit about how I wasn't quite sure what they were measuring, and how this chart might actually be a little bit misleading. If you're not a gamer, you can kind of take away your own thoughts about these different games, and it kind of puts everything in a box. So I talked a lot about context, which I think some of my peers has also talked about. And I also talked about how the social aspect of games is kind of based on your objective. And so a game like Final Fantasy, that they talk about here, could be used in a social way in the class. If you are having them play it and then talk about it, our readings talked about how a lot of times the social aspect of the game takes place outside of the game. And I also went into how you can interact with people within the game itself, so that might be social. And then I talked about Guitar Hero for the simple, complex scale in terms of objectives. So if your objective is to teach fine motor skills or that sort of thing, then Guitar Hero might be incredibly complex. So I think what they were going for is like single goal versus mission oriented or something like that. I think that would go a long way in kind of um, talking in a different way about this chart. But I picked it because I think I was able to kind of start to incorporate sources. In terms of what I talked about in the motivations reading and that sort of thing, but I think, and I did talk about it from when I tried to see a nuanced perspective, but I think one of the issues is I didn't go into enough depth in terms of incorporating the sources and really digging deep into those to talk about this chart. So that's definitely something that I want to do a little bit better next time. So for the rubric for responsiveness, communication, and critical thinking, I say I would give myself a 4.5 for all of those. Interaction with peers, I didn't really interact with anybody. I didn't get feedback and I didn't really talk to anybody on that slide. So I think maybe 3.5 would be correct there. And I did notice one or two typos, so I'm going to give myself a 4 for mechanics. Moving on to the second one. This one is audio, so I'm going to go ahead and play it. Oops, maybe. Okay, so I want to talk about representation today. Representation and story, and this one stuck out to me. That's a bad arrow, sorry, but this one stuck out to me because I was thinking, before I read the article, I was thinking of representation in a bit, I guess in a bit of a different way than what they were talking about, and then once I read it, I started kind of thinking about how I could combine the two. So in the article, it talks about how representation is sort of what the story is about, and they give what the game is about. They give the example of chess is about conflict, and Age of Empires is about the art of war and that sort of thing. And so when I was thinking representation, I was thinking about the actual characters, and what they give us as players and the connection we have to the character or avatar we're playing. And so a research question that I was thinking about is like, how do those two things connect? So how does
what the story is about intrinsically influence or indirectly or directly influence the character we play? How does what the story is about um, influence the avatar we create? So in a game like let's say Kingdom Hearts, where your character is chosen for you, how does what you do in that game and what the story is about kind of influence the way you see the character and how you play the game through them? Whereas with a story like Dragon Age, where you kind of get to pick your character and it has a more direct influence on the story, how does that work with how we play the game? And in terms of that giving us emotion, I would also say that it gives us maybe investment into the character. So how does this, I guess, get us emotionally invested in a character when you're playing some character that's already preset for you versus when you get to create your own character? And this kind of goes back to how I was thinking of representation in terms of representation and diversity, and using this in the classroom, giving students, set characters to play that might not reflect them or might not reflect their educational or life circumstances, whereas what happens if we create games where they are allowed to build their own avatar that might directly reflect themselves or what's happening in their education or their backgrounds as people. So definitely this number 12 is the one that I am most interested in possibly researching.
Okay, so I think that this one I did better in being more interactive. As you can see, I responded to Bremen's original post up here, and then Albie responded to me. I talked back with her, and then Allie responded, which I completely missed, but I will get back to her too. But for this one, it was also easier to go more in depth because of the response I got from Albie. So when she talks about a few different risk factors and that sort of thing, and context, it was easier to build on that and think about context in terms of othering ourselves and how we create avatars. It got a little bit off topic. It got a lot off topic, actually, in terms of answering or in terms of talking about representation as it's defined within the article itself. But I think it kind of stayed within the scope of the question in terms of developing research questions. And going back to interaction, I also talked a little bit more with Albie on her original post too. So for this one, I chose this one because I think it is a good example of my having an idea about something, and then through reading, seeing that idea kind of progress and take the shape of what actual game-based learning scholars are talking about in the field right now. And so I had this one idea of representation in my head, but in terms of the actual field, it's talked about in a different way. And so I think this slide is a good example of my kind of progression there. And I think a weakness of it, though, is, again, being clear on my ideas, because as I was listening to this again, I think that some of my ideas got a little bit jumbled. So being a little bit more clear so that my peers can have something specific to respond to rather than kind of trying to figure out what my ideas are is something I want to work on there. And I think I have gotten better at that. So that would be another one. So for my last uh-oh. Let's go to, there we go. So for my last one, I wanted to respond to the idea of flow, and I think this is a good example of a moment where, kind of light bulb moment for me, and that's why I picked it. So I talked a little bit about the concepts as a whole so that I could understand them, but then I directly answered the question as well in terms of here. Okay, so in terms of creating games and game-based courses that have this idea of flow in them, and so talking about how they can probably be effective, but the actual concept of immersion that goes into flow might kind of vary depending on whether or not you've specifically tried to incorporate this idea of flow into your classroom or try to design the game to maximize the flow for students. So for this one, oops, I think I communicated the idea well enough. So my understanding of this concept, I think, was communicated clearly this time, and I was able to apply it directly to examples that answered the discussion question. So I think I was able to be a bit more precise in my response. And then a weakness just goes back to the first post in that I feel like I'm not incorporating sources in an effective way. And so that's really overall my one biggest improvement goal that I want to work on. And I just realized I didn't do the rubric for number 2, so we're going to do 2 rubrics. So for number 2, I think responsiveness, communication, interaction, and critical thinking are all 4.5s. And mechanics, sorry. And then communication would be a 4. As I said, I think that was kind of my my issue on this one. And then for number 3, again, I didn't have too much interaction on this one, so I'd say that would be a 3.5, and then everything else I think was done all right, so I would say 4.5.